Hello, my name is Seth Wittenberg, and here's my concept maps for cognitive development theory and zone of proximal development. So we'll start with the cognitive development theory. This is theory kind of created by Piaget. I think he was Swiss or French. It is how a child constructs their viewpoint of the world. It is affected by not only their biological development, but their environment they're in, the society, the culture, who they're around, things like that. This research was important because it really focused on how a child learned rather than the end focus of what they learned. So, for example, it focused on, do they learn better in this situation rather than, this other situation, instead of saying, well, we taught them English, how much English did they learn? It was more of how they learned, which was important. He also gave quantitative stages, which allowed for the kind of research, allowed people to put it into kind of trackable or observable ways to find things, and therefore you could create different teaching schemes for that individual or group of students. He also is one of the first to coin genetic epistemology, which is the two root words, kind of the beginning of learning. So that's going back to this child. It's the beginning of their learning and how they learn. So like we said, some of this focused on ideas focused on the process of learning instead of the end result. And kind of what I was trying to say earlier is he created a system to track the progress. So now researchers and teachers had an actual system to find qualitative data to look at, which would help them create better teaching modules and curriculum, things like that. It focused on the individual, but also put them into group settings, and that's kind of goes into zone of proximal development and how their peers and those around them could help them learn, and they could teach as well. Discovery learning. This is kind of going on with that. It's putting the child in a situation through hands-on, kind of that outside of the books, where they're in that learning, directly in that learning environment. That's most prevalent in the elementary school, primary school grades. So here we've got schemas. These are the kind of some of the part of that classification system he created or built upon. They're tools. Schemas are kind of tools we learn. It kind of goes into the zone of proximal and the scaffolding. These are kind of like data banks we use, so we can store these things away in our brain for later use, things we're learning. we've got assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration. Assimilation is using existing brain functions to deal with a new set of challenges and stimuli. Kind of an example, just thinking from a um, PE or physical active, it's you've learned to catch a ball, and so you use some of those motor functions and that brain stimuli from catching a ball from baseball, and you translate it over to, say, lacrosse. You're just adding another element, a stick, but you're still catching that ball. So that's assimilation. Accommodation is when an existing brain function doesn't work and needs to be molded and shaped in new ways. And going off of that lacrosse example, oftentimes you can catch the ball, but now you've got this lacrosse stick, and so that that existing function oftentimes of catching and that hand-eye coordination falls away when you add that new element of the lacrosse stick. So you have to develop that new brain stimuli and those motor functions of adapting to using this new tool. Equilibration is the rate at which the brain develops. And Piaget believed that it was done more in these big strides, these big tasks that these children learn. The brain takes a lot of that information in at a time, and it's not necessarily a fixed constant rate. It changes, again, kind of based on the culture and the environment the child's in. So we go to this stages of development we've got here. We've got the sensor motor stage, birth to 2. We've got the pre-operational stage, 2 to 7. The concrete operational stage, which is 7 to 11. And the formal operational stage, which is 11 into adulthood. So this first stage is kind of that child is learning about the world, and one of the main focuses here is that object kind of permanence and knowing that even if you can't see something, close your eyes or they're hidden behind a blanket or something, knowing that that object or person or thing is still there, even though you can't see it. Pre-operational stage, the child will take things as themselves and give meaning and purpose. Even though the child may be stuck kind of in their viewpoint of the world, they still take all this new information in and kind of realize the different meanings and purposes that they have. And the concrete operational stage is taking the first two, all this learning they're doing and discovering these things about the world and how things work through the physical exploration as well. They put these things together and begin to piece together logical thoughts and greater theories, things of that nature. And then well into adulthood, kind of beginning early teenage years, they putting all this together, and so they dive deeper into these thoughts and create more complex theories of the world and how things work, and their viewpoints begin to open up and they see other points of view other than just their own, things like that, and they create these ideas of the world. So this was all cognitive development theory. It really was the steps and kind of processes of, again, how a child learns, um, what they go through, what it works for them, and just kind of that process of, why do these students learn at a faster rate than these students? And it was that process, not necessarily the end result of, well, these students know all of their math because they were taught this specific math, theory. It was more of what environment were these students in, maybe, that allowed them to learn better than these students. It's that theory of um, how they learned rather than in the result. So that leads us to the zone of proximal development. This was the idea of kind of getting outside the individual and how can a child or student learn in relation to his or her peers, and not only peers but the adults. How do they learn rather than just going from a textbook, but how do they apply and learn problem solving under the collaboration of peers and adults? So straight away we can look at collaborative learning. This is the idea of, you want students with a higher knowledge of the concept, math or lacrosse, veteran students, seniors paired with freshmen idea type of, where you want those students with the higher abilities to teach and help the students with the lower abilities understand those ideas and concepts. So that's that collaborative learning, peer-to-peer, even a coach, adult. So reciprocal teaching is kind of the classroom, or even I like to think of this on like a college lacrosse team, high school lacrosse team, where some students may have played lacrosse since they were, since they could walk, and they teach the coach things, and the coach teaches them fundamentals or discipline, so they build off each other. That's that reciprocal teaching. They can each learn new skills. A lot of college classes are like this idea of that reciprocal back and forth teaching. One of the biggest parts of zonal proximal development is this scaffolding. So scaffolding is this idea that if someone is attempting to perform a task, they don't just go, to bring that lacrosse example up again, is they don't just go from picking up a lacrosse stick to passing and catching or cradling or shooting even. To get there, you have to take it step by step. That's that scaffolding. So they have to learn, that hand-eye coordination. Just get used to the stick. After they can, get used to the stick and the ball inside, they work on aiming and passing, and they work on that catching. And then once you get the catching and passing, you work on movement with the stick. Once you get those, you can work on shooting, then shooting on the run, shooting and passing on the run. So that's those layers. As a more complex skill, they break it down step by step. This is kind of in that collaborative or reciprocal. You find these skills through a more knowledgeable other. So a coach who has a greater knowledge of the subject, of the task, is able to break it down for new students. Here's what you do. you line the stick up